Good evening, everyone. I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome, everyone. Um, Somebody sent me a question. I don't have the answer to that question in front of me that someone just sent me, but I'm just gonna, if I give you a clue, maybe you can find out. But yes, there is a seventh tradition workshop in Arizona, the weekend of it's the 24th of January. It's like somewhere in Scottsdale or Phoenix or somewhere. I don't have the flyer with me, but I'll try to find a way to the person who just asked me the question. Yes, I am that Billy N. Anyway, we will open up with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I hope everybody had a healthy, sane, and sober holidays and New Year's. I was at an Alcathon on New Year's. It was awesome. Um, and I know I got a lot of messages and I haven't even started to return them. So I will just say thank you to anyone who maybe sent one and didn't get a thank you yet. But yes, my sobriety date's January the 5th of 1990, meaning today is 36 years, which is just ridiculously obscene, crazy, um, crazy, crazy, crazy. Now, I, um, whoever takes the best notes, could someone shoot me a note and tell me exact? Oh, see, someone else told me. It's Scottsdale from 10 to 1 p.m. on the seventh tradition at 36 30. It's in Scottsdale. So I'll post a flyer. I'll get that flyer. Um, if someone could tell me and send me a message as to the exact place, because I'm on my electronic book tonight. I'm at my house on the Jersey Shore, and not I'm in the freezing cold Jersey Shore, not down in tropical Florida right now. Um, if anyone has a note of exactly where we left, I would love for you to send me a chat right now because I am using my electronic book. Okay, I got it. Thank you. I have page 136. Oh, yeah, we were talking about Class Bs, and I got it. So I want to start off with something else, though, which is more important. And that is we're now into the new year. So, what I would tell everyone who is new to service or whatever level you are, but especially for those who are new or maybe haven't been to an assembly or maybe just started, we are coming into what I would call AA service playoff season. Okay. It's about to really ramp up and get busy. And so in the last 2 weeks, your delegate is one of two types. They either are a second year delegate this year, so they know what their committee on. But for some of you, you elected a new delegate in the fall, and that delegate just became delegate on January 1st. And about 2 weeks ago, they got their committee assignment. So now all delegates know what committees they're on. That's where we sit today. In about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, there will be what we call the January board weekend. Now, at that weekend, of course, AWS and the Grapevine will have their meetings on Friday or Thursday. The General Service Board committees will meet all weekend. But what's different about this weekend is the conference committee chairs. So any delegate that's a chair of a conference committee will go to this board weekend. And they get to sit at the table when their committee meets, their joint committee. And they'll sit with the chair. And they don't have a vote, but they get to participate. Also, while they're there, all the delegate committee chairs get to go to whatever trustees committee they want to go to and sit in the visitors section where the other trustees and directors sit who are not on that committee. And they get to reasonably participate. By reasonably, I mean reasonably. Sometimes the board has to make rules like no delegates can participate unless they're actually the committee chair for that committee. So where does a rule like that come from? That comes from a delegate committee chair that had to go to every single trustees committee and take over the meeting. That's where that happened. I mean, it just didn't happen for no reason. But for the most part, everybody is treated and gets to participate. What's really interesting about this January board weekend also is that this is the last time a trustees committee or one of the boards can send something to the conference. So there's all these proposed agenda items that have been sent in, and they get assigned to a board or a trustees committee, and they do a little work on it. But after this board weekend, the final conference agenda will be set. And so it's a quick timeline. You know, I'm looking at the calendar now. This year, the January board weekend is actually the 30th, 31st, and 1st and the 2nd. So by February 14th or 15th, right around that date, the final conference agenda will be sent out first. And then all the background materials somewhere around the second week of February gets sent out for all the agenda items. Now, it has to be translated into French and Spanish, so that takes a little time. But that's what I mean. This is playoff season. So I just want to remind everyone that, like, if you don't know how the final conference agenda or background is distributed in your area, it's time for you to reach out to your DCM or your delegate, find out. You also need to know, how does your delegate review the agenda items in your area? Do you have one big assembly where they do it over the whole weekend or one day? Does your area pick out some items and let the groups digest them and send out some kind of letter? Does your area do it by district? Does your delegate travel to each district and go over the agenda items? But I can't possibly know. And the worst thing you could do is not make contact with your DCM and find out how it goes in your area. Now, the other thing that's important is look at that date this year. If you look at February 14th, it's a Saturday. So let's use February 16th, a Monday. The General Service Conference is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, basically 8.5 weeks after that. If you look at February, which we all know only has 28 days, except for one every 4 has 29 days. But when you look at February 16th, there's really only 1 week or 2 left in February. Most groups have already had their business meeting, or it's about to just happen right away, which means that you basically have March to get any kind of feedback from your group to give to your delegate or to bring to your area assembly at the end of March or April. So just know that it's real crunch time. The other thing to know is that if you live in the Pacific region or the Northeast region, the Pacific Regional Service Assembly and the Northeast Regional Service Assemblies are coming up. The Northeast is in Portland, Maine in February. The Pacific regions is the last weekend of February in Hawaii this year. They rotate. Some of the other regions, the East Central region does not have a regional service assembly. They have past delegates get together. The Southeast region has a delegates and past delegates get together the weekend after the board weekend. The Southwest region has a service assembly. The West Central region has a service assembly. So find out about those things. I'm not saying you have to go. I'm just saying that this is a very busy time of year. And the place to give your opinion or your group's opinion is with your delegate. I can't stress that enough. It's okay to get information from any and all sources. Go on every Zoom in the world. Read every Facebook private group you can get your hands on. But that ain't going to help with the group conscience. The group conscience is your group, your district, participating in your area, finding out how your delegate gets feedback. And really the most important tip I can give anybody, especially if there's a new GSR listening to this, I don't know what the final conference agenda is going to look like. Okay. But I can take a guess. There's going to be at least 60 agenda items. And I'm going low just so I'm not exaggerating. But there's a good chance there's going to be 80. Okay. Last year there was 81 or 83. You have to decide and use your own concept 3 right of decision. Which items do you really need feedback from your group on? Because some of the items you don't. Some of the items you as a GSR are more qualified to go and give feedback to your delegate. But there's some items on there that your group is very interested in. And there's no way you're going to have 12 hours to meet with your group and go through all 60 or 80 items. You need to pick the ones that your group is going to want to talk about. This is where a little controversy is like honey instead of vinegar. Because you know the most outspoken people in your group, even if they hate the word or phrase or acronym GSR, even if they don't like business meetings, all you got to do is dangle a little carrot out there for them that you want their input on the 5th edition Big Book. You want their input on any changes put forward that people are proposing for the plain language Big Book. You just need to dangle a little carrot out there to get them to participate. But you also want to make sure that you pick the ones that you really know your group is really going to be interested in. An easy way to do this is to take the time to read through the conference agenda. And we always speak in the positive, right? Very few agenda items are ever, we're not going to do this, or we're going to stop doing this. Every once in a while, there's one, but we maybe use words like we're going to discontinue a pamphlet. But most agenda items are written in the positive. All you got to do, because you know your group better than anyone else, read through one of them and say, oh my God, if this passes, so-and-so is going to have a freaking heart attack. You know, oh my God, if they do this, she is going to go absolutely ballistic. Like, all you got to do is read the agenda items and know your group and look at it and be like, oh yeah, this is the one they want to talk about. Because what I can tell you about those items, and every final agenda has a couple of them on it, those are going to be the ones that you get a phone call about after the conference. When somebody is going to say to you, I can't believe they changed this with no notice. I can't believe they hid this from us for like all this time and just surprised us with this new piece of literature, or taking out my favorite piece of literature, or whatever else. And the truth is, there are no surprises. There are no secrets. That agenda is published in the middle of February at the very latest. You just need to find the ones that you know are going to grab people's attention. So I just wanted to talk about that because I'm gonna I'm gonna make sure I mention it every week, that we are in the middle of conference season, and this is the one thing, especially that I have to be conscious of. Even the service manual. The service manual is a basic overall guide. How should an area operate? How should a district operate? What positions do we have? And it's a general framework and outline. But there is nothing about how does each area review agenda items? Do they get together by district or assembly? Do they have Zoom sessions where they go over certain committees' background material and agenda items? This is where you need to know how your area operates. It is so critical. So I just wanted to get that out there. We are going to go to page 136 of the service manual. Well, you know what? First, I'm going to do is there anybody who has any questions about the background material, the agenda, or anything to do with the conference process that is really going to start right now? Because if you have a question that's general in nature, I will gladly ask it. I'll leave a minute for anybody to ask a question. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. Terry, could you send your question in by chat, please? Just send it in. I'll give you a minute right now. Just fire it away. Okay, I don't see a question. I'll give a second. Okay, I don't see any questions. If you decide to send a question in, thank you. Okay, let's go to page. Let me pull it up. I'm actually going to go to the top of, to the middle of page 137 where it says trustee vacancy. All I want to talk about here, I do not expect you to become an expert on trustee vacancy, but it is very legal. I don't want to say it's complicated, but it is very legalistic because this is a legal document. These are bylaws. And here's what we know about AA. We try to write bylaws and guidelines to help us along, but inevitably some situation comes up that no one thought would ever happen. I was just visiting an assembly this weekend. They had to get a sense of their area committee because a situation with a vacancy came up that was never contemplated in their guidelines. So they had to find a way to temporarily fix it. And then obviously now they need to change their guidelines. A question did come in. I'm going to read it. The question is, how do I get my hand on the agenda items? I love that question. You contact your GSR or your DCM, and if you can't get in contact with them, you find out who your area delegate is. The final conference agenda will come out sometime after the beginning of February. And then each item on the agenda, each committee has a section of background. But the best advice I can give you is to get in touch with your GSR. If you are a GSR, get in touch with your DCM and find out how your area operates. On page 138, there's a very important section of the bylaws. It's titled Powers. It says the Board of Trustees shall have all the powers provided for in these bylaws and are vested in the Board of Directors under the laws of the state of New York. The members of the board, subject to the laws of the state of New York, are expected to exercise the powers vested in them by law in a manner consistent with the faith that permeates and guides the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, inspired by the 12 steps of AA, in accordance with the 12 traditions, and in keeping with the charter of the Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what that's really saying is the trustees are supposed to always consider the steps and the traditions and the charter, but they're only spiritually bound by them. They're legally bound by the laws of the state of New York to operate that not-for-profit. Remember, in New York, they don't use the term non-profit. The law in the state of New York is the not-for-profit law. But the trustees have immense legal powers. Then the next section is affiliate corporations. It says the General Service Board may set up new corporate bodies to serve the purposes of Alcoholics Anonymous, provided the General Service Board shall own all of the capital stock of such corporate bodies, and if such corporate body is a membership corporation, the structure shall be in keeping with that of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. Manifestly, the General Service Board is expected to refrain from forming any new corporate body if a majority of the conference delegates shall disapprove in its formation. So let's talk about what that means. We have 3 corporations. The General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, Inc. is kind of the holding company. And then we have AA World Services, Inc. And we have the Grapevine, Inc. Now, we used to have a third corporation. That was dissolved in like 1999, 98. The law in Canada has changed, which makes it easier for us to operate and sell literature over there. And we have a warehouse in Canada so that we're not shipping constantly from the United States, so that we can make one big shipment to our warehouse, and then they can make shipments to groups and intergroups in Canada that order. So that cuts down on a lot of delivery cost. And it cuts down from things being delayed going through customs, going over the border. We used to have a corporate board that was a Canadian company that a couple of the AAWS directors just did double duty. And it was just an issue with the Canadian tax law. When that Canadian law changed, we dissolved that corporation because we didn't need it anymore. So today we have 2 corporations under, affiliates, AA World Services and the Grapevine. What this is saying here is that we won't form another one if the majority of the conference doesn't think we need to. The other thing it's saying, and it can be a little tricky because it says the corporate board shall own all of the capital stock of such bodies. And then it says, and if such corporate body is a membership corporation, its structure will be in keeping with the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I know this is a little repeat, but it's so technical and hard to keep hearing. That means this. The General Service Board as a company does not own the capital stock of AA World Services and AA Grapevine. They are a membership corporation, meaning the members are the owners. The members of AA World Services Corporation are the 21 trustees. The members of the AA Grapevine Corporation are the 21 trustees. And the members of the General Service Board, Inc. are the 21 trustees. So let's use me as an example. I was a non-trustee director for 4 years on AA World Services. That means out of the three corporations, I was a director on one because I was not a trustee. I was one of the non-trustee directors on AA World Services. But 4 years later, in 2013, I was selected to be a general service trustee on the AAWS board. So now it changes a little. I'm a member of the general service board. I'm one of the 21 owners. I'm also a director on the general service board of AA Inc. That's the holding company. For AA World Services, I was a member because I'm a trustee. I'm one of the 21 owners of AA World Services. But I'm also a director on that board. I'm one of the 9 directors. Then we have the Grapevine Corporation. Since I'm a trustee, I'm one of the 21 members. But I am not a director on the Grapevine board. So I exercise my oversight through custodial, through Concept 8. I take part in electing the directors, but I'm not a director on that board. But once a year, I legally vote as a member as to who should be a director. I know that's awfully complicated, and it's like jumping in the deep end of a pool. And no one expects you to know all of this overnight. The way the General Service Board makes sure that it keeps somewhat of control of the AA Grapevine and the AAWS board is at least 4 trustees have to be directors on that board. So then we go to officers of the General Service Board. We have a chair, we have a treasurer, we have a secretary, an assistant secretary. I've been saying 21 because for the last so many years, there have been 21 trustees unless somebody died in the middle of the term. If all things go as planned, after this conference, we'll have 22 trustees. The bylaws permit that if the chair is a Class B. So I'll slowly kind of explain that. When the chair is a Class A, we have 14 Class B trustees, 8 regionals, 2 at large, 4 general service. That's 14 Class B alcoholic trustees. And then we have 7 Class A's. Usually, one of those 7 is the chair. That's what's usually happened the last 50 or 60 years. There always needs to be 2/3 alcoholic and 1/3 non-alcoholic. So when the chair is in A, that's it. One of the 7 A's is the chair. But if a B becomes chair, like happened last year when Scott became chair, we can have a 7th Class A because we'll still have 2/3 with the 15th alcoholic trustee on the board. The chair serves for 4 years, not 6. The chair has to be a past trustee or a current trustee in their last year. That's the only people who are eligible to be elected. And right now, we have a Class B chair. And because of that, because the last chair was a Class A, that position is now open, that slot on the board. And the board will probably, I would say, at this January board weekend, will select somebody to go to the conference to nominate them to be a Class A trustee. I did see a question come in. Oh, great question. Is it appropriate to attend other pre and post conference forums to observe and learn more? Or is it better to read only what my delegate and area is reporting, since there is the area where my group conscience participates? That's an awesome question. I would say this. Let's talk about participating. You participate in your own area, at your own district. You don't need to be throwing in your 2 cents into some other area. You let them reach their own group conscience. However, there is great benefit in going. I recently said at SASA a couple of weeks ago, I think everybody in service should go to another region's event. PRASA, NARASA, SURASA, WASASA, whatever. Because, sometimes we get so regionalized in our thinking. Sometimes we get so area wise in our thinking. And I think it's very helpful when you go to another part of the country or another region, when you hear where the majority thinks very different than the majority of where you come from. And instead of just thinking like, I'll give an example. It's an example. I'm just saying things I may have heard, okay? I may have been at some AA event on one of the coastal places where maybe somebody couldn't help themselves and said, what do those people in the middle of the country care or think anyway? Okay. Now, I've been in the middle of the country where I've heard somebody say, those coastal elites, they want to make all the decisions for the rest of us, right? After all, AA is made up of human beings, right? But the truth is, it's kind of nice when you sit down someplace and you hear a majority speak about something that's the exact opposite of the way you were raised or what you hear. And you kind of get to hear why they think that way and feel that way. And I think it's immensely beneficial. I also think for people that are really interested in service, who want to stay involved, it's nice to visit other areas. It's nice to see how people do things. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes you go there and you're like, what the hell do they do it this way for? We do it much better. But sometimes you go there and you're like, wow, why don't we do this? Wow, that is a really good idea. Inherently, and I can say this because I'm a panel 49 delegate, right? 1999, 26 years ago. And I think AA is changing because the world is changing. But you have to remember, process started. I know the people in the Pacific region hate when I say this, but it's the truth. They thought the general service structure was too large. They thought that maybe west of the Mississippi should have their own general service office and general service structure. That's what originally called PRASA to start. NARASA, there was a man named John S., who was a past Northeast Regional trustee, who was a past delegate from Northern New Jersey. He heard about PRASA when he was a trustee, and he was actually the speaker at the PRASA in Arizona in like 80 something. But him and a couple of other delegates and past delegates from the Northeast traveled and went to PRASA, and then NARASA came. But the world was very different. Just think about 1990. Cable TV was a couple of years old, okay? Still, most people only had 4 TV channels or 5. They had ABC, NBC, CBS, and they could watch the Cubs anywhere in America. I don't know why, but that's the way it was, right? Um, there was no 24-hour news channel yet. People like my parents watched the local news at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and at 6:30 watched one of the three national news for a half hour. The late night news, I think the first late night news show came when the hostages were taken in Iran. ABC had a show on. People still got the newspaper. In some cities, you were a morning family or an afternoon family or got both. I grew up in New York. We got the daily news in the morning and Newsday in the afternoon. That's how my house worked. But still, a lot of people got their news 24 hours later. We don't live in that world anymore. We live in an immediate news world. And not only is it immediate, but if it's juicy, it gets replayed every half hour. The same story, days in a row. Like we live in a totally different world. And there's good and bad about that. Same with AA. AA, the structure was a culture of don't wander out outside your area. You don't need to leave your village. And today, most of us live in a world of there may be a good idea outside our village that no one ever told me about. Um, I think I said recently I was on a delegates workshop. It was a delegate in the Northeast who has a workshop one night a month for their area about some topic. And they invited three delegates from other areas. And one of those delegates said on that workshop, you know, I really like this. I wish we did this in my area. But if I brought in people from out of my area to speak, I would get hung out to dry. So I think it is good to go and see what other people are doing without dominating or throwing your 2 cents in or taking over their group conscience. Um, I think what's really interesting is when you go to different delegate report backs after the conference. And sometimes you're like, wow, were they at the same conference or was one on Earth and one on Mars? Like, were they at different conferences or, but that's the beauty of the delegate system. That's your representative and they're going to give you their view of what happened. Someone asked about, you know, just a majority over 50%, not 2/3. Yes, it says in the bylaws, like I read to you, if a majority of the conference doesn't want a new corporation started, the board should listen to that. Did I hear you correctly? The board of the General Service Board has trustees and directors. I thought that only AWS Inc. and Grapevine Inc. had all directors. I'm going to go very slow because that's one of those places where you don't hear the legal a lot. The General Service Board has 21 members. Those 21 members are also the directors of the General Service Board. The only place you'll ever see a listing of the directors of the General Service Board is on their 990 tax return. Okay. That's where you'll see the term director used for that corporation. And they're all trustee directors. On the other two boards, you could be a non-trustee director, a trustee director, or you might be the general manager director or the staff coordinator director or the executive editor publisher of the Grapevine director. But yes, the General Service Board Inc. has a board of directors. It's all the trustees. You just rarely hear that legal term used. Um, so that's why you never hear it. People say, why do we call them a non-trustee director? I thought all 9 directors are equal. Yes, all 9 directors carrying out their responsibilities as a director are equal. However, when I was a non-trustee director, I didn't get to vote for who would be on the board of directors of AAWS the next year. When I was a trustee director, acting in my capacity as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous World Services Corporation, I got to vote for the new slate of directors on AAWS. So it can get so complicated. Um, and I know some people don't care and other people just love those details. So um, it's the hard part of doing something like this, of trying to keep everybody happy. Um, Very difficult. So I think the bylaws of AAWS and the bylaws of the Grapevine, we can do in a week, but it's definitely a full week. So instead, for the last couple of minutes today, I'm going to go to Appendix R, which is a select list of literature published by AAWS and Grapevine. And if you see that and you go a couple of pages, it goes all the way from 161, 162, 163, 164, 165. That's not everything we publish, but it's a pretty good sampling. We have a lot of literature. You know, it's funny because sometimes I'll be at a AA event, especially a service event, and somebody is always like, we need a moratorium on no new literature. I mean, they have a right to say that. What I always find interesting about that is it's more interesting to me how many people have not read or heard about some great pieces of literature that they don't even know they exist. I mean, I could start with the AA group pamphlet. I mean, basically everybody in AA knows almost there's a big book and a 12 and 12, right? That's pretty given. The daily reflections is pretty common. People seem to hear about it. They might know about As Bill Sees It. But so many people don't know about the AA group pamphlet. So many people don't know there's the Traditions Illustrated and the Concepts Illustrated. So many people don't know there's a thing called a member's eye view. So many people don't know half our name is anonymity. We have a pamphlet called Understanding Anonymity. We have people who do corrections work and treatment work and cooperation with the professional community work and accessibility work. So many people don't know that there is a workbook for each of those committees with like real lessons learned and material in there. So I have total respect for anybody who wants to stop the literature publishing. They're entitled to their opinion. But I'm more worried about, we don't have a problem with too many people reading our literature. I get it. Some of those people think it's costing too much. They think that. They think it's taken up too much time making it. Put that over to the side. We definitely know it's not hurting anybody because we can't get people to read most of our literature. And there's some gold out there. And, I think that's one of the beauties. People say, well, COVID was good. We had good service workshops. We had a lot of big book workshops. People who don't get to hear about the big book where they live got to hear about it. There were 12 and 12 workshops and concept workshops and traditions workshops. But to me personally, The real beauty of COVID, I would say, was two things. I'll give a little plug. Next Saturday, there's a special forum for the deaf. I hope you all go to aa.org and get the information to get online and go to that. Because there's no doubt that what the Saturday Evening Post did for Alcoholics Anonymous to the hearing alcoholic, COVID did to the deaf alcoholic. No doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. But the other thing that I think was the beauty of COVID is all of a sudden people started doing workshops and study groups around pieces of literature that are never talked about. Language of the Heart, AA Comes of Age, Problems Other Than Alcohol, all these great things. So, um, you know, all this literature is there. I hope you go online to the AWS literature catalog and the Grapevine catalog and find out, maybe something you haven't read. On page 166, Appendix S, I'm so glad this is in the service manual. General service and intergroup central offices. It's not just in the legacy of service. Because unfortunately, I've heard people in general service say intergroups aren't part of AA, which is very funny because intergroups and central offices existed long before general service. They are the original AA offices. They just have a different purpose. They're like the boots on the ground wet work. They deal with the people who need to get help and getting help to them. Whereas general service deals more in facilitating 12-step work. But I'm glad to see it here so that we know that we don't say things like they're not part of AA. And I love this first sentence here. A central office or intergroup is an AA service entity. So if we could just stop right there, is an AA service entity that involves partnership among groups in a community, just as AA groups themselves are partnerships of individuals. An intergroup central office is established to carry out certain functions common to all the groups, functions which are best handled by a central office. And then it goes through a lot of things that the average central office does. But central offices are super important. And I'm so glad that this section, this, appendix is in there. If you get to Appendix T as in Tom, that's a brief history of the Grapevine. And it starts out by saying, Grapevine was started by a group of 6 volunteers in June 1944 as a newsletter for AAs in the New York area. But Bill W. and the editors soon saw that it had a broader potential for unifying widespread groups and letting the public know about the new program. In the first issue, Bill wrote, "May its rays of hopes and experience ever fall upon the current of our AA life and one day illuminate every dark corner of this alcoholic world." So the Grapevine was originally on newspaper, and then it became articles. And we all know the Grapevine's lost a ton of money. The readership is not what it used to be. We still have Box 459. That's more like a newsletter than the Grapevine is. We then have other newsletters sharing from behind the walls, markings on the journey for archives, the professional newsletter. But the Grapevine is a big part of our history, and again, I get it. I'll be the first to admit. Has there been some articles in the Grapevine that I can't believe were published? Yes, of course. But that would be like me saying, I've never heard a speaker that should have been able to speak at an AA meeting that I was present at. Like, I've left a few AA meetings wondering who asked that person to speak. Like, what the hell did I just witness? I've left a few conventions like that, to be perfectly honest. So why are we're so judgmental I found out today, just as an example, just by talking to someone who had a question that I owed a phone call, an area that is one of the most critical when I was on the board of the financial operations of the board, I found out today doesn't even have a finance committee and has huge problems with their finances. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that is so hypocritical. But alcoholics tend to be hypocritical, and we tend to always look at what's wrong with everyone else and not ourselves, which is why we have a whole chapter on taking our own inventory and not others. Um, but I would tell you that the grapevine serves a very legitimate purpose and is able to transmit real-time stories in a way that the big book will never be able to. The last big book was published in 2001. That means that the current fourth edition of the big book, the preface, the forwards, the first 164 pages, and all those stories are the same as they were in 2001. I'm not saying they shouldn't be. I'm just saying they are. I'm not even getting into that debate. But think about 2001. You know what's really amazing about reading every story, especially the new stories that were added in 2001? Think about that. Those stories were called for in 1997, okay? They're not 2001 stories. They're 1997 and 98 stories that were written by mostly people who got sober in the 70s, some in the 80s, maybe one or two in the 90s. Do you know that in the current big book, in the section of recently added stories, there isn't one comment about a sponsor or a sponsee texting each other? Do you know that? It's fascinating to me when I read it. Like, I have to train. Well, first of all, I know from the young kids I work with at work, they don't use voicemail. Okay. Voicemail is like an optional thing that's not used in the world anymore. You know, they, if somebody doesn't answer the phone, they send a text like instantaneously. Like, why aren't you answering your phone? Right. Um, but just think about that. All the stories in the big book, there's not one about a sponsor or a sponsee texting each other, got a text, sent a text, anything else like that. There's no story in the current big book about social media. There's no story in the current big book about someone who found Alcoholics Anonymous through the World Wide Web. Think about that for a second. There is no current story about somebody who found AA by looking for a meeting online. So if we approve a fifth edition big book this year or next year, it will be stories that at the latest were submitted a year ago. Okay. So 2024, meaning most of those people got sober in the 90s, 2020, 2010. Think about all the technology that won't exist, that doesn't exist right now, that will exist in 20 years, the next time we come to printing a new big book. The grapevine has been printing stories about texting and the web and finding AA through the web and social media. And I read a story about some young kid in Ireland that saw a mention of the Irish Young People's Conference on Facebook and went to the Irish Young People's Conference and met his sponsor who was there speaking, who was visiting from America. Like, the grapevine has a huge purpose in being able to bring real-time relevant stories to our membership. So as easy as it is, I could focus on the finances if I want. And believe me, I want the finances fixed. But I mean, if ever there was a don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, it's having relevant stories printed for our membership in the grapevine and the ability to pivot on a dime, you know, during COVID, during lockdown. And, yes, the AA today is probably more open-minded than the AA of the second edition was printed in the bicentennial. I mean, in the third edition, 1976. We went from 1976 until 2001 without another big book. But you look at some early grapevines, even up into the 90s. You look at some stories in the big book. Like there are some topics that the grapevine is able to hit straight on. Single parents, single moms, single dads, childcare. How do you work your schedule around going to meetings? Non-believers, believers, all kinds of things. Um, the grapevine serves just a huge purpose in Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, so whenever I hear that talk about instead of something going away, I'd much rather the talk be useful about, how do we make it more useful and relevant for today and make it work financially. So page 171 is the path to become an agenda item. Let me date myself talking about relics and things that are not young. Uh, you know what this thing reminds me of? If you ever watch cartoons on Saturday morning, Conjunction Junction, how does a bill become a law? Like, that's what it reminds me of. How does a bill become a law is now, how does an idea become an advisory action? And it spells it out 1 through 5. An idea, suggestion, or question, or concern, or subject comes from an AA member, GSR, DCM, area committee, blah, 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 and may be shared and discussed at the group, district, and assembly, and sent to the conference coordinator at GSO. The idea is reviewed by GSO Grapevine staff and forwarded to the appropriate trustees committee or appropriate corporate board, which then they may refer the matter to the appropriate conference committee. They may not if they have the power to deal with it alone. The conference committee, which meets during the General Service Conference week and makes recommendations and then are presented to the General Service Conference. And then if a conference committee recommendation is approved after full discussion, it becomes an advisory action. So I will take any questions that anyone has. Let's see. Is GSO AWS doing anything to prevent people from publishing PDFs of conference literature like Pass It On? I would imagine that this means that the AWS isn't earning revenue. That's a great question. And as someone who was on the AWS board for 8 years, I want to just share what we always talked about. And I talked to current AWS directors. We were never scared to put the big book in PDF on the website. If somebody wants to print out 164 PDF pages and staple them together and make their own book, have at it. That is not going to compete with our big book that we sell. You know what competes with our big book that we sell? The AA members who print their own big books of the first and second edition that don't have a copyright. Those compete with us, but not the PDFs that are on. And the other decision the AWS board has always stood by, especially when it comes to pamphlets, saving a life is super important. If somebody's going out on a 12-step call or doing something or going to meet with a treatment center and they need to print out a pamphlet, so be it. It turns out we don't have to worry about people printing things out because it seems now in 2025 or 26, people don't even like to print things out anymore. They have things like PDF Expert, where they can highlight and mark up and do whatever they would like to do to any PDF or any book. We'll always have to be responsible with charging enough for books that we make money. But I'm going to tell you, it's such a great question. My first year as a director on AWS, at one of our meetings, we had a special 3-hour executive session, meaning confidential. And it was really interesting because the chair of AWS and the general manager at the time, now remember, this is 2009, invited 3 really, really like genius experts from Silicon Valley, from Palo Alto, to come talk to us about the future of technology and digital media. And it was incredible to sit there and listen to them talk about the future. And I remember the third speaker, because nobody liked what he had to say. But he looked at all of us and said, I have some bad news for you. It's really not for you, because it's not going to happen while you're on the board. He said, but I'm just warning you. In the next 20 or 30 years, we are approaching a time when you will not be able to charge for content. That's the first time I ever heard the word content used over and over again, was at that meeting with those experts. They never said book. They never said paper. They never said Xerox. They never said PDF. They just said content. And he said, I don't know how much of your budget is based on getting paid for books and other stuff. He said, but you better be prepared for the future. So thank you for who asked that question, but they're really not worried about PDFs bothering us that much. Does anyone else have any question before we sign off tonight? So I'm just going to tell you, the bylaws of AWS and the AA Grapevine are a little different, and we'll go through both next week. Because you have to remember, the bylaws of the General Service Board, the 21 members or owners are also the 21 directors. AWS and Grapevine, the trustees are the members of those corporations acting as the owners, but then they elect a board of directors to carry out that work for them on those boards. And 4 trustees are on each board. So their bylaws are a little bit different than the General Service Board bylaws. And it becomes complicated because when we use the word member, people think we're talking about the directors, a member of the Grapevine Board, but we're not. The members are the trustees with a capital M. If it says members of the board of directors, that's a director. But we will go through that next week. And again, I just want to give a big plug for the deaf special forum next week. You can go to aa.org and get information on that. I can't wait for it, actually. I really can't wait for anyone that's done a lot of service with the deaf during Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's amazing how many people don't understand that American Sign Language is not a translation of English. It's its own language. You know, because we have people in service that say, why are we paying for an ASL interpreter? Why don't we just have subtitles? Well, because it's not the same language. For those who are hearing impaired, they may speak English and may read subtitles, but ASL is its own language. And even learning about interpreters and how to keep a screen black behind them, and how to make sure that the camera is up so that, because so much of ASL is facial expression, not only the sign language with the hands, but the facial expression. Um, and also remember that the deaf, I heard a blind guy say it. He said, I was never thankful to be blind until I came to AA. He said, because then I realized if I was deaf, I'd be in big trouble because this is a storytelling organization. Because I'll tell you another thing that the deaf is a challenge. They can't be videotaped. Only their interpreter can be videotaped. So when they tell their story, it's not really them. It's an interpreter who we're filming doing the ASL. So I only say that because I'm not sure. I'm still sure I have more to learn. But there's such a big segment of our population. And the more you get to know a couple of deaf members, they're so isolated in their alcoholism, both because they're isolated already with their accessibility issue and their hearing. And then if they're not, can't participate in AA. So this whole Zoom thing with interpreters, as a deaf member said to me, it's kind of like Zoom enabled the deaf to have a clubhouse, something they weren't able to have for the first 80 or 90 years of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I think about that, it's just amazing. Like, there was no clubhouse for the deaf. Now we have all these great tools that 25 years ago we were scared that the internet was going to destroy AA. And now, we see the benefits. So with that, I'm going to close with the responsibility statement. I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.